It's so important to be the leader who supports people and gets into that tough situation, gets into that sinking ship, right? Yeah. And helps you plug the hole and figure it out together.
Welcome to Suffolk's Lessons in Leadership podcast, where we have authentic, wide-ranging conversations on leadership. Each conversation is a deep dive between external experts and Suffolk team members and is designed to help our people build their leadership skills, think creatively, and redefine what's possible. On today's episode, we're speaking to John Regentin. John is the Vice President of Experiential Leadership and directs the Gettysburg Leadership Experience. John led several thought-provoking discussions during our recent Immersive retreat in Gettysburg, home to one of the most historically significant and difficult series of battles during the American Civil War, and even today, a sacred place for all Americans. From the Suffolk team, we're joined by General Superintendent Gary Haavisto and Superintendent Mackie, both of whom attended that retreat and explored what this historical site can teach all of us. Our topic today is resilient leadership and how we can prepare, empower, and connect our teams for success. I'm Jay Tangney, your host for today's podcast. For context, maybe it's best to start with you, John. If you can tee up what the Gettysburg program is, what it's about, and what the objectives were for our group, which is primarily senior operators like Gary and Mackie coming into Gettysburg to spend a really significant amount of time reflecting, learning in what is obviously hallowed ground in the United States.
Sure. Yeah, so the design of the Gettysburg Leadership Experience is really kind of twofold. The first is it's a design program, right? And so the idea behind it is designed to make people think more critically, think differently. It's not a skill program. And so we put that out there immediately for people to understand that we know that the folks at Suffolk are subject matter experts, right? They are professionals, they are successful. We're not here to tell them how to do their job better. So we go in with that lead to say, what we're going to do right now is we're going to leverage a narrative, a story, a metaphor, and let that come to life, not necessarily talking about backward causation of what went well, what didn't go well. Let's second guess or play Monday morning quarterback of what took place in Gettysburg, but more importantly, what happened in Gettysburg and how can we really leverage that moving forward? So it is proactive. We're constantly talking about proactive positioning, anticipatory leadership. How do you kind of view what's taking place on the horizon, and planting a lot of questions for folks to kind of start to think about in terms of their own leadership style, but more importantly, their behavior. How is it that we can take narratives of the protagonists that were at Gettysburg at the time, elevate that story, and then from there, they can ask themselves, Buford, I like that story. I love that story. How could I be a Buford in my organization? We're not telling you that he's the best, right? But it might resonate, with somebody a little differently, And so that's the idea, is that we're constantly kind of going through a cycle of classroom to battlefield, classroom to battlefield.
And what did participants have to do in terms of homework to get ready to learn about the Bufords and all the different facts and chronology that is so important?
So number one, I knew nothing about. I'm not a history gal.
I'll tell you what we hope that they do.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not a history gal.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I really did. This can be a confession too. It's okay.
No, I did my homework, but I didn't know anything about the Battle of Gettysburg really before we got there. We read Killer Angels, which was a great book and really framed the experience, I would say.
Okay. Harry?
Yes, I got the book.
Still coming.
As much as I try and get into reading it, I got through about 12, 15 pages, and the movie was the way I was able to immerse into what happened there. And there's a lot of things coming from that from a background standpoint, because I knew about Gettysburg, the battle that happened from school and learning there, but not a lot of detail. But even in starting to watch that, there was a lot of synonyms and things that I can pull into what we do day for day. And it stood out like 5 minutes into the movie that I see what's kind of transpiring here and what this is going to kind of lead into. then once we got there and were able to start going through the program, it was an emotional first day and getting there and going through that, because having an understanding of the complexity of what happened there and some of the way that happened, and it relates not in the same manner and critical life-threatening type deal, but being able to take those same things and understand the leadership roles and things that we apply and face in similar ways to decisions that had to be made during those battles was, there was a lot of impact to that, and it was one of the best takeaways I've had from a leadership program my entire career.
You're raising a lot of good points. I think there's an emotional reaction when you get to a place like Gettysburg that sometimes you can't anticipate. There's so many important historical war references and sites that, we respect and honor in this country. And sometimes it seems as Gettysburg is occasionally overlooked for different reasons compared to, World War I, or especially World War II with the 70th anniversary of Normandy, where we also did some podcasts. When I went to Gettysburg, I was just overwhelmed by sort of the loss of American life because of American versus American, right? And there's so many intimate stories from Killer Angels, and I watched the movie as well. And one that I thought about in preparing for this is, you're on a job site, you have a wonderful plan. You have a plan for the day, right? In the military, you always have a plan for the day. At Suffolk Construction, we have a plan for the day until it starts. And then something happens. And that's what happened here.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
What's a takeaway or two that you can compare from your experience with the leadership program at Gettysburg to your real life every day down in Naples?
Well, tying back to the plan, right? Pivot. We talked about pivoting. There was a lot of pivoting in Gettysburg with Chamberlain, right? And we pivot every day at work, especially in the field, right? We've got this plan, and either material, manpower, obligations fell through, and you have to pivot. So the power of pivoting and pivoting smartly and then communicating. One of the things reading about Gettysburg was, there was a guy on a horse who had to go tell someone what the next move was. And I think when we were there, we were like, couldn't just
text.
Hey man, I need you here
right now, right?
Hey man, we're moving, So the power of communication, definitely, and everyone understanding the plan, the core of the plan also was important. So.
Yeah, great point. And, you talk about the leadership piece of it, right? And when the plan changes, anxiety goes up because something didn't go right. And one of the things that you talked about in Gettysburg is sort of that anticipatory leadership, where Mackie goes into her job site every day and knows something's not going to go right.
Right.
You have to anticipate that as a leader, and you have to stay calm in that storm. And that's really one of the tests of leadership. It's easy to lead when it's sunny out and everything's going great.
Absolutely.
The hard part is when things aren't going great.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, that's what we ultimately say is, I think, that leadership, or being a leader, right, is to create the conditions for the team to succeed, right? It's not to do the work for the team, right? But let's just create the conditions. So every morning, are we creating the conditions? If you create the right conditions for the team then to be mobile and make their own decisions, then now we can move to anticipatory, right? Now what are we paying attention to on the horizon? So just making that little step. I think the big piece when we talk about in Gettysburg too around this whole notion of anticipatory leadership is recognizing that there's we have a Venn diagram, right, where we talk about the leader. Well, we can't be a leader in our role if we don't have what? Followers, right? And so the importance and value is that who are we reporting to, who's reporting to us in order to get the mission done. But then the third variable in that conversation then is the situation. Is recognizing now when the situation changes, where am I toggling between leader and follower? Because now it might be, yes, you are sort of in the role of to make the decision, right? You're the authority figure in that role. However, though, in this case, it may be a little bit out of your scope because the situation has changed. It still falls to you, but the situation has changed so drastically that it might be a little bit of a reach. So then the question is, who are your mentors? Right? So now are you tapping into other people to help you make a better first decision? as everything is evolving pretty quickly. Do you have that network in place? And again, anticipatory leadership. Do I have the right people in place to connect with during a time of crisis?
So do you have the right guy on the horse?
Right.
Right? To compare it back to what you said, Mackie.
Right.
And what to say.
Did he hear my message? And he
did he get there in time?
Right.
Yeah.
And the other big thing that you brought up that hit home for me in Gettysburg is giving people the right tools and equipping them. One of the quotes was, if I've set my people up and I've given them everything I can for them to do their job, it's kind of like, that's my job. And then what they do is up to them. And that's something that I came home with, thinking about, have I set my guys up? Do they understand the SOPs? Do they understand the processes? Are they equipped to do the job that they need to do? Am I communicating, right, where we need to be, what the schedule is, and making sure that they understand the plan and that they have the resources that they need to get it done?
Because if you don't do that, you're destined for bad results.
Right.
So Gary, let's talk a little bit about mission critical and how this concept of anticipatory leadership applies. And if you can, maybe a minute or two on what mission critical is, because I think it's unique in Suffolk's sort of profile of business. It's a largely mobile workforce, incredibly dynamic, fast-moving jobs, a lot of new personnel. There's probably a lot of things that you took away from Gettysburg that you can really apply, especially with what you're doing and your experience level. But can you set it up with what mission critical is?
So mission critical as a whole falls through several different market sectors, but primarily what applies to us and when mission critical is brought up is data centers. How much time the failure rate or the lack of failure rate for the infrastructure for the building to stay up and uptime is what really drives the term mission critical for it. But we're spread out all over the country, and it is, we don't always get the support of, not saying we don't have the support, but don't have the security of support of knowing, if you're doing work right here in Boston, corporate office is right up the road, or if you're in, the Dallas market where we have established offices, we get out into areas where there's 4,000 people in the city and we're building in the middle of nowhere. Jobs now we're starting up that are in the $1 billion range and growing from there, and we need to bring on staff of 100 plus. And where are those people coming from? How do we make sure we're preparing and getting set up to get the job started, to have all those people that come that are going to have the same value that we have at Suffolk, to be able to merge into a team and be functionally successful during the course of the job. It becomes a big challenge, and a lot of stresses happen from that whole thing too. And yes, the clients are, tomorrow's not soon enough to get these buildings up. I mean, the hunger for the amount of data that's in the world, and us as being a kind of data-centric organization, we feed right into that. But I mean, iPhones aren't going away. Streaming services aren't going away. All those creature comforts that we have today it's just the demand is getting higher and higher. So I kind of looked 10 years ago when I was doing work, and it was a lot easier to find somebody that had the right skill set to bring onto a job and understand what we need to do. And hey, here's the plan, let's go. Nowadays, it's almost to the point where the guy walking down the street, do you want a job? And that's not just us. I mean, that's across the boards. I mean, when we have jobs starting up in an area and you're talking about needing to bring 20,000 trade people into an area that hasn't seen 20,000 people in a city alone. And now we need to bring that type of masses. So there's some challenges and things that we have to prepare for that take a lot of that anticipatory into play. How are we going to do this? At what points do we have to have certain things set up to be able to even start the job off right, let alone trying to get to the finish line?
Incredibly challenging with the speed, the mobility of the workforce, and the demand on the ownership side. So that anticipatory leadership concept is probably something in your life every single day.
The meetings don't stop, and it's all about that. What are we thinking about for tomorrow? And really, if we're only thinking about it for tomorrow, we're late already, right? We need to be a month, 3 months, 6 months out, what things are going to come and affect us that we need to prepare for now to make sure we don't fail in the next 6 months.
John, can you define the concept of high ground for an individual and for a company in your experience in teaching and what you do at Gettysburg? What does that mean for people listening to the podcast and for Suffolk?
Sure. I think it's what your strategic advantage is. I mean, that's if we're going to do a boilerplate.
It's the why.
It is the why, your strategic advantage. What is that? What differentiates you from another company? What differentiates you from another employee? What is it about you that provides that level of advantage? So is it culture? Is it vision? You know, I mean, there's some technical elements you could probably throw in there as well, but really, why is it that people would be attracted to work for your organization? And then what's going to keep them there, you know, day in, day out? If you have two organizations sitting side by side and they both ask the same question, we need you, would you come work for us? Why would someone select Suffolk over the other construction company, right? And so I posed the question to Mackie, and I said, okay, what is your high ground, right? And she's like, well, you know, you're kind of working through some things. I said, no, but personally, let's begin there. And I'll get to this point, right? And what was your response? Do you remember what your...
I'm a solid person.
You're a solid person.
Related it to being reliable.
Reliable. So she starts talking about just, okay, I'm reliable. People personally, you know, respect me because I'm reliable, okay? And then what comes up is that, well, if I'm reliable personally, then should I also be reliable, you know, professionally, right? And the answer was yes. People rely on you and you feel that way. So then I asked about Suffolk. I said, what is it about Suffolk? She goes, they're reliable, right? And so there's an alignment of value that is highly important in connecting what is it that I really truly believe personally in my everyday interactions to, does that align to how I show up professionally? And then does that then scaffold up to the element of the organization in which I'm working? And so in this term of Gettysburg, we start asking people, so we're not telling you what your high ground is. The question is, do you have a high ground? What are you not compromising on, right? And recognizing that the high ground from a military standpoint, obviously, right, it provides advantage. It gives you sight lines. It's a force multiplier in terms of, we say, you know, you don't need more people. You just need to position them better, right? And they then are going to become your high ground. You know, if things are consistent, if people are reliable, if the organization holds true to the value in their mission, and people can certainly, you know, appreciate that. So then the question we come up with in the Gettysburg is asking, all right, does everybody within the organization know where the high ground is? You know, and I've had board members and senior executive teams who've argued about that.
About what the high ground is?
What the high ground is, right? Is it financial? Is it the customer base? Is it the client, you know? And if they can't agree, then how is it that the frontline personnel know where to go?
So does an organization have to have consistently the same high ground?
No, because the situation changes, right? But there needs to be some level of consistency in which we believe that has to be communicated to the team.
Gary, what do you think the answer to that is, not only at Suffolk, but in Mission Critical, which is such a growing part of Suffolk right now?
I mean, honestly, it falls back to the emphasis on our core values. You know, and the caring side of the one always comes up. Having the consistency and the transparency of expressing those and being consistent with that message all the way through is one of the things I think that helps us be very successful. And our clients see that because they're asking us to do more and to take on more in other areas because we repeatedly give them the same message and the same product in the same way each time we do it.
That consistency, right? That we're talking about.
We're not afraid also to say, yeah, we messed up right there, but we're going to fix this. You know, the honesty and the transparency comes through. The professionalism is...
Yeah, that's a part of it, right? I think that honesty piece that we've all talked about is really important for another reason too, which is if you have this culture of fear, sort of the legacy stuff that we've talked about a little bit, it creates an environment where people are afraid to tell the truth. If they're afraid to tell the truth, it's harder to see and anticipate the problems that you need to, especially on a super complex job, right? Or a super complex fact pattern in life. And without that information, maybe you can't get your sequencing right. So if people don't trust you, you're not going to know. And I think that's really essential to building data centers really quickly and really well. And then that comes down to communication.
Time is of the essence, right?
Yeah.
So a day and not hearing about something can cost you weeks, because that's the speed that things happen. And, not to take it away from any other area of construction that we do, because leading with that status of fear only hurts us throughout, whether it's a slow rolling job that's going over 4 years, or if it's, a fast-paced job that's turning over in 12 months. If we're not getting the answers and we're not finding out the situations, the problems that come up, then we can't help guide to fix those. And every job we do, time is of the essence, right? Everything's scheduled. And if it's not happening in the time frame that we need, then the question comes out why. And if the why happens too far down the road, you don't have the ability to recover. And, I always try and tell everybody that works with me, and it's not necessarily that the problem that is there, but what do we have for an answer? What's the fix? Because we never have a bad question except the one we don't ask.
That's a great point. I mean, I think when you talk about that culture of honesty and trust, it's a must-have in 2025. And I think about it in terms of Gettysburg, right? Because in Gettysburg and in the military in general, that leadership by force and fear, you can get away with it a little bit more because people can't leave.
Right.
Right? Here, and you talked about this with trying to get 100 people on the job site, who've never worked at Suffolk before. You have to convince them, based on your high ground, to stay, because if you don't have that high ground, or you're not the type of leader that you've been talking about, people will quit. They just walk away.
Because the reputation for us, right?
Yeah, there's so many opportunities to go do something else and say, I'm not going to put up with this anymore.
And really that becomes our attraction for those people we need, is the reputation we've built.
Yeah.
Because
the high ground.
Yeah. And who wants to come join the team that is like, man, those guys are horrible to work for. They don't care about you. They only want you to show up, work you to death, and not pay you anything. When we get the type of reputation that, hey, they're caring, they're honest, the expectations are well known, people want to be there. They want to come to work for us at that stage.
Yeah, that's what we're looking for.
I think Suffolk's high ground is definitely its reputation. It works with owners, right? The reputation of we can build big, fast, complex, right? We really can build anything, and we have built everything, it feels like. And then also the reputation for our people, back to our core values of understanding that we're cared about, we're taken care of, and the caliber of people who work for Suffolk.
So my reaction to that is our sort of most preeminent high ground are our core values.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And we spend a lot of time talking about those core values. And I think most of our leadership thinks about those core values. And those are really centered around people, right?
Right.
We talk about people as our number one asset because nothing happens without the right people in terms of building these very complex things around the country. So establishing those core values as part of our organizational high ground, I think, is something that is how I would answer why Suffolk and not why someone else. We admit that Suffolk is not for everybody because it's a place where you have to really want it because it's hard.
Right. Yep.
It's hard, and it's not the Battle of Gettysburg hard, but every day certain things need to happen. So like for me, when I interview people coming in to the company, you don't want to swing and miss. You don't want to have someone come in and have them not like it. You don't want to make a mistake for you because it's an investment every time you hire somebody, something you guys are experiencing very acutely. And I just always say something along the lines of, Suffolk is a today place. Like at your job in Naples, you're not there, but your stuff still needs to happen today. And it needs to happen because there's a financial consequence to Suffolk and to the owner if it doesn't. It needs to happen whether you're doing a podcast up in Boston, whether it's raining, no matter what. Things need to happen at Suffolk every single day. Mission Critical is a great example of that. That environment isn't for everybody, and that's okay.
Right.
And I think that's part of our high ground as an organization.
Is being clear about
some people thrive in that.
Right. And I think that's what people need clarity on.
Yeah.
People just need to know, okay, this is either for me or it's not. And that's okay. And I think one of the other pieces is you guys, when you first arrived, you kept talking about your communication organization, right? Like that just resonated with us right out of the gate, at times to say, that's what we do. We communicate. So you better be a good communicator in terms of, your leadership role here in the organization. When I say within the first 5 to 7 minutes of meeting folks, that's what I was picking up on.
Yeah, it's almost like you can't over-communicate in this day and age, and we have a lot of tools that didn't exist back in the 1860s. But, you read Killer Angels, you go to Gettysburg, or whether it's the American Revolution or whatever the case may be. To your point about the horseback rider, there are so many variables left to chance when communication either doesn't happen or goes poorly. And even with all our iPhones, that's still true, right?
There's half the reasons why we wind up having problems on the job site, because some line of communication was either misinterpreted or didn't happen. When we don't have the clarity of what the goal is and where we're trying to get to, and the understanding of the steps that we're trying to take to get there, that's when we get breakdowns.
So how do you mitigate that from a leadership perspective on a construction site?
We have meetings, we sit down and we talk about and put the plan out there. The reality is, with our trade partners and people that we're counting on to go out and do the work, because I always tell everybody, we're not really the builders. We're not building these buildings. It's our trade partners that are building the buildings. What our job is to help develop a plan that they understand and buy into, remove the obstacles out of their way, and let them go do what they do. Let them go build the building and get the job done. Our biggest job is to look out in front of them and what's happening and make sure that they don't have something that's going to stop them from getting what they need to get done. Or when those problems come up, help guide through those problems to get to a resolution. And I always train and make sure the teams are bringing our trade partners in on a regular basis, a daily basis. In the morning, let's talk about the plan that's happening today. What things are out there, and what things do we think may go wrong? Do we have weather issues coming in? Do we have material issues? Do you have people that didn't show up today and now your manpower is affected and timelines may change? Is the job site ready for what you need to do? Is grade right? Do you have clear lines of sight? Is everything set for you? And if we get all of those answered ahead of time, then it's a lot easier to try and get the job done on a daily basis. Anytime any of those circumstances change, now we have to have a pivot plan. We have to make a decision. Okay, how do we help resolve that?
And communication, right, leads to relationships, because we're about communication, but we're also relationships. That's all our industry is relationships, and understanding the power of the tone of communication and how you're communicating. And we talked about it last night, right? Email's not enough. You had an issue. Hey, did you call them? Oh, I sent a text. Did you call them? Right? Yeah. And making sure that you're forming those relationships also helps us get things done in the field. Because it's not enough to just send an email, send a text. You have to create this relationship with people of, when I call you, I need you, right? And if you have that relationship, they'll get things done for you.
I think that's such an important point, because it's quicker and easier to send a text and then you put it on someone else to respond. It's off your list. It's out of your inbox. It takes longer to make that call, but the call or the visit also demonstrates that you actually care about this issue and this person, and it lends itself to sort of both trust and vulnerability, right? So one of the things that was discussed at Gettysburg is establishing trust with people as a leader, right? So how do you do that every day with your crew down in Naples?
It goes back to the tone of what you said about manpower, right? That's an issue globally, I would say, is manpower. And establishing trust with people is also, in the mornings when you have your morning huddle, them being comfortable enough to come to you, because it's not the guys in the field who are pulling the manpower usually, right? It's somebody above them, and they get what they get. And when they are low on manpower, and instead of, it being like, well, you need to get more, because you're not going to get them that day. It's working through, these are the areas that we need you. Let's prioritize together. Can we send 3 to here, 2 to here, and 1 to here, And
so you're in it with them.
You're in it with them, absolutely. And that builds trust with them, because you don't want them coming to you and saying, I have 10 guys, knowing that they only have 5, and then you walk out there and you realize, oh, there's only 5, and then it gets combative, right? Yeah. You want to establish that trust with them, that they can be honest with you, especially when it comes to, shortcomings, or if there's obligations that they can't meet, or if they don't have material, of having the trust to have that honesty between them. And it's the same way for us, right? We mess up. And sometimes I have to go to them and be like, I am in a pinch. I really need help. And when you have that relationship with them, they'll do anything for you. And same for me, I would do anything for them to just get the job done. We all want to get the job done, right?
How important is what Mackie just described to the lessons at Gettysburg? It seems to me that it's directly on point with the things you talked about down there.
It is on point when we think about it. If you really want to watch a great piece, right, the Chamberlain conversation, right, when he welcomes the second Maine, and he takes care of their needs first, right? Like just listening. We talk about active listening all the time. What is it you need? And then we can get into some of, what are the grievances? What's taking place? What can we do to be helpful?
Yeah.
And so just establishing that is so significant that sometimes when we use this in the framework of the program, it's talking about the difference between transformational leadership and transactional leadership, right? And it's not saying that one is better than the other, but the situation is going to dictate when you probably need to pull on one versus the other, right? When someone's showing up and they have a problem, certainly we could go, if we're transactional in our day-to-day, it might be the point. This is what we talk about with Gettysburg. There might be a point after you've been at Gettysburg, you go, wait, this might be that Chamberlain moment we talked about.
Yeah.
But I need to be more of a Chamberlain in this moment, in this conversation, and then I can come back to being sort of my day-to-day. But that's what we're wanting people to kind of start to explore. And that's why we call it, the metaphor is the left flank, because that's the shadow side sometimes that we still need to develop. We need to pay a little bit more attention to. Our reaction might be always to be transactional. But after leaving Gettysburg, we go, the value of just asking people, how are you doing today, can go a long way. And to your point, right, when it comes time and crisis in the moment, when you ask for assistance, they're going to be probably more willing to step in and help out.
It's central to so many things in life, what you're talking about, because it's either you're going to motivate people a certain way or you're going to demotivate them a certain way. So when your example, Mackie, someone comes and says, I'm down 5 people today, you could react with hostility and anger, and then you just demotivated the listener, right? And they're not going to help you when something bad happens. They're probably going to dislike you. They're probably going to go talk to others about how the boss just reacted to my problem, as opposed to, we're shoulder to shoulder in this, let's figure it out. You can come to me with your problems and you're motivated. And then that person wants to come to work the next day, right? Because it's tempting.
Sure.
When you're in crisis, and we have them all the time, they're unavoidable in complex construction. The easier thing to do is to react transactionally.
Correct.
With that negativity.
Right.
So you have to avoid that and be patient, I think, when negative things happen. That's how you don't lose people, right?
Right.
I think that becomes the growth of leadership, is having the understanding of not to lead by emotion. Because when those problems happen, everybody instant is reaction. God, dear, are you... Instead of, okay, what do I need to do to help? How do we... What's our plan then? Let's sit down, let's talk about how do we fix this then?
So that leads into the next topic I want to bring up, and it's a perfect segue into how do you demonstrate vulnerability as a leader, a senior person on the job? Because again, in our industry, sometimes that's counterintuitive, right? Because even for a really successful woman, it can be sort of this tough, macho sort of culture that people want to put out there to the world. And historically, it's not a secret to say that construction people don't generally show vulnerability. It's also true of the military, right? But that's changed a lot too, right? You would never really show vulnerability as a leader in the military historically.
Historically, right.
But then when you go to Gettysburg, you see that actually did happen in order to win people's trust over from senior leadership. They did demonstrate vulnerability. So how important is that vulnerability to you in what you're doing every day?
Very important. It goes back to me saying, right, I'm in a pinch. I need help. And asking a trade partner for help is not always easy. And then it also goes back to, right, I messed up. I made a bad call. Can you help me get out of this? And for me personally, my vulnerability that I try to work on is even among the team, right? I'm a very serious person at work. And even just taking a minute to laugh, right? To talk about the weekend and try to get to know the team on a more personal level and kind of open up my more personal, right? Is super important, and it builds camaraderie with the team as well.
Reveal a little bit more of the non-professional side.
With the trade partners, we always have an agenda, right? We always have something that we need to get done. And sometimes if there's a little bit of abrasiveness or if, they aren't seeing it or they don't want to do it, sometimes you have to say, I need this done and this is why. This is what I'm really trying to get after, which also goes back to the higher ground, right? Of understanding what's really important and prioritizing. And sometimes you have to be honest and communicate it with them of this is what we really need.
Yeah, so important how you communicate that, even if someone's not receptive to that sort of vulnerable moment, right? You just still can't go negative. Gary, what's your experience with that vulnerability side?
It's been something that has been a transformation over many years. I mean, there's no secret back in call it the good old days or the old days of construction, it was lead with the iron fist mentality, and it was all by fear. And, don't want that guy mad at me. And then they go, you're off and doing what you're doing. Where we're at today and what we need, not only from a people standpoint, but from the speed and us as truly living up to our core values as a caring company is one of our big core values, is having the understanding that, we call them trade partners now for a reason, because they need to be our partners on the job. We're not out there. Our success is based on their success, because if they're not going to be successful, there's no way we can. Getting them to have a full buy-in and commitment to what the goal is probably the biggest challenge we have. Personalities vary between all the trades. Your electricians, your mechanical guys, your rod busters, all of them have different personalities, and all of them come with a different way of expressing that and trying to show that I know what I'm doing. You don't need to, and being able to manage those dynamics becomes the real challenge that we have on the job. How do I get that angry rod buster that thinks he's got the best way to do it to understand that, hey, we may have a different way that can do this, can also help save you some money and make the job better. Also making sure that we hear them and we're not just there directing them, right? It's your plan's only as good as what everybody else is ready to follow as we get into the leaders, followers, and sometimes we need to be the followers. Tell me how you need to get it done. Okay, great. Now let me help you get that done. Now we can set the table. Now I can understand, okay, now I need to go get these people to do this, do that. So we're moving the right direction at the job.
So just to sort of thread this needle, one of the things that we're sort of talking about now is the change in the industry from leadership by fear and sort of this aggressive, hostile, yelling environment, not just as it relates to trade partners, but even amongst ourselves, right? I think it has evolved for the better. And the truth is, the leadership style that we're talking about now, that we spend time thinking about and reflecting on at places like Gettysburg, is much more time consuming.
Yep.
And you have to be an educated leader to do it.
At the beginning, I think.
That's right. But once you set it up, it can get humming pretty good.
That's correct.
But at the beginning, you have to be thoughtful and think about, how am I going to establish trust with these people? How am I going to lead them in an actual caring way, to your point? How am I going to reveal some of myself along the way so that when something happens, which it will, they want to dig in shoulder to shoulder with me and work? That's different than go do this because I told you. When you set it up the right way,
certainly,
you're in it together, right? As opposed to that fear leadership that we're trying to move away from.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting because when we talk about vulnerability, I think sometimes it gets confused between emotional and emotion. right? People feel like, oh, if I'm vulnerable, I'm showing all this sort of emotional baggage that comes out, right? Versus just being able to show some level of emotion and care and have sort of an ethic behind what you're asking people to do. I think when we think about linking this back to Gettysburg, and there's a one clip of a video, right, where Meade comes in on the first day and asks, and we call this the order effect, asking the right first question, and he shows vulnerability. But his question is simply, is this good ground? Are we in the right spot? And he's assessing, he's grabbing information from his counsel versus just coming in and just saying, okay, this is what we're going to do, right? So he is willing to ask the right first question to say, give me what I need. And I think that to me is certainly a level of vulnerability that we need to recognize what we don't know. And
I was just going to say that.
Yes, right? Like just to walk, is this the right spot? What is it that I need to know in order to make a better first decision? But it's also by asking the right first question.
It takes experience too, right? Because when you're new to leading a group of people, the temptation, and I've been through it, you want to act as if you know everything. And you want to demonstrate that I'm in command of everything I'm supposed to be in command of. And in most of our jobs, that's really impossible because they're so complex and things are constantly changing and you need information. So it takes a certain level of self-confidence to admit what you don't know and rely on the people around you. And that's why that trust thing that you're talking about is so important.
Absolutely. And back to, I love what you said, Chamberlain asked, what are the grievances? Imagine if we met every conflict with, okay, what are the grievances, right? And getting down to the real issues. And to me, vulnerability is behind the facade. And I think that goes into how I said I'm very serious and I'm kind of a strong character and individual, and letting people get past that and kind of understand personal Mackie and the Mackie who laughs. And everyone who told me, who I talked to coming here, Mackie, remember to smile, right? But that's just me. I'm serious at work. I've created, especially on this last job, some really strong relationships from being able to talk about the personal. And, you were out last week because your wife had surgery. How is she? And every time one of my foremen is gone, when he comes back, we missed you, man. So glad you're back, right? But I think vulnerability, especially in conflict, is everyone being able to drop the facade and get to the core of what's really the issue. Let's talk about what the core issues are instead of just continuing.
But I have this thing that I use at work, and I have 4 children, and they're mostly adults. But something will come up and someone will be unhappy, could be at work, could be at home. And to your point, I try to pause and look at them and say, what's your give a shit factor about this? Mm-hmm. Do you really care about this? And if you really care about it, then why are you reacting this way? And it disarms people a little bit to put it that way, because are you pretending to give a shit, or do you really care about this? Because that is a decision that you have to make. And all those kind of trite sayings like attitude defines your altitude, I actually believe most of those things.
Sure.
You have to make a decision about how you're going to react to your guy.
Yeah.
And that's going to define the outcome, right?
Correct. Yeah. It's I'm thinking about in terms of, I was telling him a little scenario that I'm dealing with right now behind the scenes, right? And my issue is it's all based on principle, right? And so I do care, but because principle's at stake. Of just, did you said you were going to do something, and I'm expecting you to follow through. Yeah. And it doesn't mean anything to the rest of the world, right?
No.
But it does mean something to me and the families that it's going to impact if I make a different decision.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean that I'm not going to change my mind, but right now I'm still holding on.
So you care deeply about that?
I care deeply about the families that it's going to represent or it's going to impact.
Yeah.
Right? Less about me because it's going to be them. They're going to say, well, I thought X, right? So it's just a silly scenario. But it will have impact to people who I care about.
Yeah, and I guess to pick up on that, John, with all the decisions we make every day and things we talk about, I've thought more and more as I've gotten more experienced and older about when you make a decision, you think through the intended consequences. What are you trying to get to? But almost every time you make a decision, there's a series of unintended consequences that you have to think about. And that's especially true on job sites. And I think you have to be careful to think through sort of the decisions you make, because sometimes if you don't anticipate the unintended consequences, you can put yourself in a jam as a leader. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yeah, when we think about, even on these decisions on Lee's last day in Gettysburg on July 3rd, does he make the charge?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And he's coming in with a record of 8-0-1, and he's been successful in everywhere except for in a new territory, right? And so without going through, what are the unintended consequences of what this decision is going to make?
Yeah.
And we won't ever quarterback that one, right?
That's a tough quarterback.
Yeah, you're not. But the point, though, is that we start to say, well, you have been successful. And even though we've been successful, sometimes we have to take pause.
Yeah.
Because we continue to drive people in the way that we've been going. Do we ever just stop and be proactive in our sort of anticipatory elements and say, maybe this next step is going to be problematic?
Yeah.
So we have to kind of start to think about it in terms of that.
It's a great point, and it kind of reminds me of something that we talk about at Suffolk a lot, which is what we're really talking about in many ways is servant leadership, right? Because you have to serve the people that you're responsible for, as opposed to the mindset of them serving you. And I think a lot of that captures different things we've been thinking about in our conversation.
When we're out here from a leadership standpoint, the biggest thing that we have is building trust. People have to trust us that we're trying to put a plan together that's good for everybody, good for the project. The owners trusting us to build and give them the product that they're asking for. The people that are reporting to us or looking to us for guidance and the ability to grow and continue their career. All the way down to the trade partner. They're expecting us to have enough plan in place for them to be successful when they come on to the job. And
putting their faith in you.
Yeah.
And,
you take a situation like Gettysburg where literally, like we were talking about before, I need to go to somebody and tell them, hey, I really need you to do this. And by the way, you're probably not going to make it home after this. To build that kind of following and trust in somebody to say, yeah, I'm going to follow you because I know I'm going to die, but I believe in what you have. We create that environment as a company and across our projects. The ability to fail is almost eliminated.
I'll share a story that I kind of live by that also goes back to Gettysburg. And if my buddy Paul ever watches this, he'll probably laugh because he has no idea, I'm sure, the impact that it made on me. But he told me one time about a story from his senior super. One day his senior super came to him and said, Paul, what do you do when you're on a sinking ship? And we've all felt that before, right? Being on a sinking ship. So what do you do?
Oh, this is not rhetorical.
No, it's not rhetorical. Right? The initial response is you jump off and swim, right? You swim to shore.
In the Navy, we save the ship.
You save the ship. You plug the hole, right? And seeing how leaders react in tough situations, making sure that I'm the leader who plugs the hole, who gets to the root of the issue and supports my people. And especially, at Gettysburg, there were some really tough situations. There were people that made bad decisions, right? Sickles, I think it was, who didn't stay where he was supposed to be. He went forward and...
Doing your homework.
I read the book, okay? I read the book. And,
yeah, he's a character.
People on our team make bad decisions sometimes, and nobody wants to be in a tough situation alone. And it's so important to be the leader who supports people and gets into that tough situation, gets into that sinking ship, right?
Yeah.
And helps you plug the hole and figure it out together.
That's the test, though, right? That's the test of whether you have set this up the right way. When the ship starts to go down, who's standing next to you to save it?
Right. And making sure everyone's not. We talked about that last night. Imagine if, I think the other thing that stuck with us is motivating the soldiers to do what they did. And we were saying, imagine if, you've got 200 guys and you're walking into battle, you look behind you and they're gone. And having that support system, establishing trust with people that they're going to follow the lead and they're in the battle with you.
Yeah, it's a great comparison. John?
Well, I will always fall back on creating the conditions for the team to be successful. Like the team first, always mission, and then myself sort of last. And so if there's something that I've learned over the years of my professional growth and And a lot of my work is actually in the sea kayaking and mountaineering, developing and designing expeditions, right? Like always constantly making sure that the team has the right equipment, we understand the environment, we prepare for the situation and also have a plan from which to deviate. But everybody's aware of that going in.
Yeah.
And so are we always creating the conditions? Are we always creating the conditions for us to be successful, whatever the expedition looks like? And measuring success differently. It doesn't mean the summit. To me, it's always, did we return with the same number we left with?
Well, that's true in our business for sure. Yes. And again, what you're talking about really is servant leadership more than anything else, empowering teams, the projects, the mountaineering crew to be successful and bringing everyone home safe.
Bring home every single time. The summit's always there, right?
So you've been doing this for a while and a lot of experience, and you see something that's going to create turmoil or become a crisis on the job, whether it's a weather event or a safety event or a personnel event. What do you do to get ready? What do you do to minimize the impact? Because, there's an impact. We can pretend that these things don't change the trajectory of jobs, but they do. And how do you minimize it? How do you get ready? And how do you handle it as the boss?
So we went through a situation where we're building towers and the amenities are on the lower floors and then the towers are the condos. And it became apparent to us that the amenity floors weren't fully designed yet. There were still some questions we needed to work through. And our concern was stacking trades, right? We can't wait on this, so we had to pivot. And
so what does stacking trades mean, just for...
It means you need them here and here and here and here and here and here.
All at once.
Yes, all at once. Instead of having, what we really try to do is give trades a flow, right? When you're on site, you're on site, and you're on site till you're done.
Like you want to sequence it a certain way.
Yes.
When you stack them, everyone's going at the same time.
Right, because labor is what labor is, right? You don't have 1,000 people.
Yeah.
You have to work with the labor that you have. We also, when you're building, right, the big things you have to look ahead to is getting your utilities, so getting permanent power, permanent air, getting your elevators going, that kind of thing. And so it became apparent to us that the lower floors were not quite ready. But sequence-wise, we built the job to go bottom up, but we had to pivot in that moment and start with production. So instead of starting on this floor, now we're starting on this floor and we're moving up to get these floors out of the way so that we can come back to this floor.
All trying to stay on schedule.
Right. And to establish that flow with the crews, because if we waited until all of this would be ready, then now we need you on every floor up here. So it's pivoting, also understanding, right? Anticipatory leadership to me is really seeing the big picture, understanding the variables and prioritizing them, understanding what your kind of, in my mind, the high ground variable is, something that you can't give up, and holding it here, right? And if you have to sacrifice these things, that's okay as long as you achieve this. And you can't get back here because then it's gone. So that's one of the challenges that we faced. That's how we overcame it, is we changed up sequence. It happens all the time, right? We're pivoting daily in the field, and it's going to get us to definitely a better crew flow. And actually it'll be nice because we'll be pretty much out of the towers by the time that this comes online. And then you only have this, right? You're mitigating your challenges instead of having the whole building on fire, if you will, of I need it done now. Now I only have this that I know I might struggle on.
So sort of key thing, right? You had a choice when you saw this coming. You could have ignored it, sort of, hoped for the best.
Waited.
Hope is not a strategy.
Right.
Put it in the too hard pile, which we all have a too hard pile of stuff we don't want to deal with. But instead you sort of embrace the fact that, okay, this is going to be really difficult, and you get ahead of it. And did it work?
It did.
It worked. So you got ahead of it, right? Anticipatory leadership in action. So Gary, we've talked about mission critical and the incredible challenges facing that part of Suffolk's business. As a leader in that area, can you talk about a crisis that you've had to confront, how you handled it, how you stayed calm in that storm and navigated through it to mitigate the problem?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a current one going on a project. So contractor is refusing to sign a contract. Well, we're only doing slab on grade right now, so how is that important? Elevator doesn't come in until there's a building, right? And well, no. We need to have pit information. We need to have embeds designed for those that all go into our slabs that we're pouring. So that stops submittals. That stops the ability to procure that material. Now, how do we keep the building moving forward? We have steel coming in several months. So that work needs to be in place, and it's critical with the grade beams and where the anchor bolts are for where these elevator pits are is all integral to being able to stand our steel. So those challenges right now are how are we now finding an alternate to be able to block out maybe where that area of the elevator pit is? How do we keep the job moving forward to still, or are we now going to look at resequencing steel to try and get the rest of the building going, but find the ability to come back to that area because we've still got a couple weeks before we're going to be able to kind of resolve and get that part of the job back on track. So, those are some of the challenges that we didn't foresee, but now they've come up. And now how do we plan around those? How do we get everybody else to help us solve the problem?
Well, and so part of that solution will be the relationships you've established
with our trade
all the
partners,
impacted people, because of your credibility, your high ground, to kind of marshal them.
Open up our vulnerability to say, hey, what can you do to help us?
Can you help us? We have a problem.
What things can we do, right? Because we're not always the know-it-all. We're, like I tried to say earlier, we're only there to try and get problems out of your way, but most of the time, they're the ones we need to rely on to give us the answers.
And hopefully, by that point, when you come across a crisis, whatever it is, you've built up sort of this bank of goodwill and credibility where people know how you are and they want to help you, right? And that's part of that high ground proposition, I think, John.
It is a high ground proposition.
So I want to thank everybody for being here. Really enjoyed the conversation, covered a lot of ground. I also want to say thank you for coming up from Gettysburg. It was
thank you for having me.
Yeah, incredible event at really an incredible place, a place that will be special for Americans for eternity. And we're thrilled to have you lead us through what was, I think, an incredibly successful exercise for our operational leaders, and look forward to
Thanks for
working with
having
you
us.
all again.
Well, thank you.
All right.
Thank you for the
Appreciate it.
opportunity. Appreciate it.
You've been listening to Suffolk's Lessons in Leadership. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next time for another leadership conversation. Thanks so much for listening.